Hi everyone, my name's Emily Febri. I'm also known as Ranger M. I'm an environmental communicator and educator, and I get to talk to a lot of different people about all things nature and conservation. I love to knowledge share, and that's what I want to do with you. So come on, let's go learn with Ranger M. Have you ever wondered why Long Point has not one but 2 national wildlife areas, a provincial park, a biosphere, and more? Well, today we'll find out why from Paul, who works at Long Point Region Conservation Authority, Cynthia, who works at Long Point Region Biosphere, and Dany, who's with Canadian Wildlife Services. So let's go catch up with Paul. Thanks, Paul, for joining us. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your role at Long Point Region Conservation Authority.
Well, my name is Paul Gagnon, and I'm the Lands and Water Supervisor for Long Point Region. I've been there for over 23 years, and it's a great place to work. We're one of 36 conservation authorities in Ontario, and in our watershed we have over 2,700 square kilometers, and we have over 225 kilometers of shoreline of Lake Erie.
Wow, very big CA and very prominent location, right? Like you have a good chunk of the Carolinian life zone in your area, but you also have this huge sand pit that goes through it as well. So very unique area.
We're part of the deciduous forest region, but we also have a really big chunk of the Carolinian zone, which runs from Grand Bend to Toronto and south to Lake Erie. The Carolinian zone kind of makes this area so unique, and it has a representation of species from the Carolinas down the States. And for example, you've got sassafras here, which has 3 different types of leaves. You have the mitten leaf here. A good example would be this one here. You also have Casper the friendly ghost, which is that one right there. And you have a leaf that's entire. So it's kind of unique that way. And also, if you want to do it, confirm it, snap off a dead branch and take a smell. It's got very, very fragrant smell to the bark and the leaves.
Oh my gosh.
And you also have things like tulip tree. Here's an example of a tulip tree right here. And there's black gum, there's cucumber magnolia, and a lot of different things like flowering dogwood, eastern flowering dogwood. So it's a really, really unique area.
And are these species rare to the Carolinian? Like even in the Carolinian life zone, are they rare to find here in Ontario?
Definitely. Like although the Carolinian zone runs from that Toronto to Grand and south, that zone has very small pockets of these species. Now, areas like Charlotteville Township and South Walsingham within Norfolk County, these species are quite abundant. If you look over here, we got a tulip tree there, we got a tulip tree here, another few tulip trees there, lots of sassafras, very, very abundant. Now, you do get species like cucumber magnolia, which are species at risk. They are really rare. And eastern flowering dogwood, for example, is also a species at risk because of the dogwood anthracnose.
So you're saying that you have a relatively large watershed. How many areas do you have?
Well, this Conservation Authority tract is one of over 11,000 acres that LPRCA owns within our watershed.
If someone was coming to this area, where would you suggest that they could go and find a good hiking trail?
Well, there's a lot of great areas and hiking paths throughout our properties. You have Bacchus Woods, and you also have Hay Creek Conservation Area.
I was wondering if you could show us a couple other Carolinian tree species.
Sounds good.
I don't recognize this tree. This one looks different. What's this one?
That's actually a black gum. It's a Carolinian species too. You can see the branching is perpendicular to the stem, and it makes it really look like a hawthorn.
Yeah, the branches do kind of look black. Is that where it gets its name?
That's a very good question. Maybe because it's so gnarly, it kind of looks like it should be on a Halloween movie.
That is very true. So this one looks familiar, like I've seen a cucumber tree before. Is this one the cucumber tree?
Exactly. This is a cucumber magnolia. It's a species at risk, and there's very few of these within Norfolk County and the Carolinian zone.
And do you guys have any idea why that they're so at risk?
That's a good question. But we're actually working towards woodlot management to open up and promote the regen of cucumber magnolias.
Yeah.
It's one of our projects.
And what makes this tree kind of so unique?
Well, it's Carolinian. It has a really neat fruit to it that looks like a corn on the cob. It has big entire leaves. They're alternate. Yeah, it's just a really, really neat species that we have here.
I almost didn't even spot this one. What's this one?
This is eastern flowering dogwood. It's another species at risk. You can kind of tell it because it has that upsweeping motion to it.
Yeah.
And as it matures, the end branches look purplish.
Oh, wow. Obviously gets its name. It has pretty flowers at some point during its life, probably.
Oh, beautiful white flowers. And they're actually, the white part is actually bracts. It's not the flower. The flower is very tiny in the center.
Oh, okay. Wow. Thanks for showing me this. One more thing I wanted to ask you about was the sand spit that is a very prominent thing of Long Point, and I was hoping you could tell us a bit about it.
Well, let's go take a look at it.
Perfect. So this is quite a view. Where are we?
Well, right in front of us is Turkey Point. And in the horizon there, that whole line of trees is Long Point.
Oh, wow. I've never had this view of it before.
Yeah, Long Point is the largest sand spit in Canada. It's 40 kilometers long.
Wow.
And it's one of nature's most interesting erosion and depositional areas.
Yeah, so before we go too far, what is a sand spit?
It's essentially a tongue of sand being deposited into open water.
So why is it so unique and doesn't happen more often?
Well, sand erodes from the bluffs all the way from the west Port Glasgow, all the way to Long Point. And it basically feeds Long Point and creates the wetlands and the sand dunes characteristic of this point.
Obviously, west of here, all of this erosion is happening along the bluffs, which sucks for those areas, but you're saying it's vital for Long Point.
The erosion has irreversible impacts on both property and infrastructure to the west, but it's so important for feeding Long Point. And unfortunately, things like the Port Burwell Pier actually catch and store a lot of that sand that goes along the coastal littoral zone. And it actually stops sand from going to Long Point, which you know, does impact the deposition and possibly the future of Long Point.
The sand that's here already could also keep going. And then if you're not getting that new sand filling it, you mean kind of thing?
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's in constant motion because of the wave action and wind.
Right.
So you need to, as the sand drops off the end of the point, you need to replenish that sand with the eroded material from the west.
So looking at all of these wetlands, you have that sand pit, but how are these wetlands, because you said the sand spit also contributes to the wetlands, so how are the wetlands formed during all of that?
Well, this, for example, is the Turkey Point wetlands. And in the littoral zone, and the erosion actually comes from the east and goes west in this area, forming Turkey Point. And behind that sand spit, you get these very diverse wetlands full of species at risk and just migratory areas and things like that.
Overall, like, we've seen lots of different species in the forest. We can see the sand spit and know that it creates an amazing habitat. Birds, for one thing, flock this area, pun intended. And then you have the wetlands as well. So this area is just so unique and so biodiverse. So it's just such an amazing ecosystem and environment as a whole. Is there anything we can do to help it?
I think you're doing it right now. Education is the key.
Yeah.
The more people who understand how important this place is and how biodiverse and potentially resilient this is to climate change, I think the better chance it stands to be preserved and protected.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us, and, you know, continue the good work.
No problem, it was a pleasure.
Well, Cynthia, thank you for joining us today. If you could tell us a bit about yourself and your role at the Long Point Region Biosphere Association.
I've been with the Biosphere for 9 years now. Started off with Naturehood, funded by Nature Canada, and it rolled into Priority Place, so project manager for the first Priority Place in Canada, which we now have 11 showing on the website, and I think it's going to grow to be about 14 Priority Places.
What does Priority Place mean, really?
Priority Place started off as a pilot here to see how we could collaborate with all the partners that, I mean, they were already here in place and working well together. So it was an effort to see what kind of restorations could be done on the land to create habitat. Before it was more of a, let's work with species at risk, and it was kind of backwards. So we wanted to create a habitat where we would invite species back.
just to circle back for a second, what exactly is a biosphere?
Oh. A lot of people think it's this glass globe,
Yes.
man in his world in Montreal, right? So what a biosphere is a location with high biodiversity
Okay.
that includes humans
Oh, okay.
and how they intersect sustainably.
Okay. Now going back to your priority place project, we were kind of talking before this. You are doing an immense amount of work through this project. Could you tell us a bit about the different things that
Sure.
you
I
have
sure
helped
can.
with?
My responsibility with Priority Place is outreach and communication, and that is working with all of our partners, including our First Nations partners, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, being that this is Treaty 3. So we do a lot of discussions about what they'd like posted, how well they're working together, what issues are we running into, where can we support one another. And part of it is also education with students, bringing students on the land. So we have a beautiful MOU with the University of Waterloo where some of their students get a chance to get time out doing internships, like working on the land, not just working in theory. So one of the projects that we've embarked on for the last 3 years was the Moccasin Identifier project, which is with the Mississaugas of the Credit. It's an attempt to bring people together. How we did that was through art and through treaty classes. So high schools were invited here to the Forest View building in March of 2022, and they did an hour-and-a-half class with the Moccasin Identifier team, learning about the fact that we're all treaty people. Like that agreement is with the Crown, but we are people of the Crown, right? So we did stenciling.
Okay.
Moccasins were used as the symbol. And each nation has their own moccasin. And so they learned about 4 different nations. And they did these beautiful stencils. And they did an hour-and-a-half class with the international artists that were part of the mural project to express how they're feeling. Because sometimes just words just don't happen. They were asked to do an expressive piece showing what they think unity looks like, what peace looks like. And from those pieces, the artists pulled together their main concept for their mural.
As a biosphere and as part of the priority place, you do a lot of work with wildlife and animals and species at risk in general. Can you tell us a bit about this project you were telling me about reintroducing some species?
One of our partners that Jessica Linton works with, NRSI, she's been working a lot with some of the butterflies that had been extirpated from here. One being the mottled dusky wing, and this year we were fortunate enough to be able to catch everything on film. She did a release of that species on a few of the blocks that are tall grass prairies that have the specific plant that it hosts its larvae on, which is New Jersey tea. With all the things that happened over 100 years ago when people first arrived here, they deforested it to farm. They didn't know any different. They didn't realize they were on a sand spit on the Norfolk Sand Plains. And when you have a combination of sand and prevailing winds here, we ended up with a lot of dunes.
Yeah.
And so there was a project that was brought into play, which was the St. Williams Conservation Forestry Station. And they started off with trees to hold the land together.
Yeah.
And so we've gone from blow sands and dunes to what you see here today.
Yeah.
So it's a success story. It is a story of hope for people. I know that they hear a lot about the negative stuff in the news, but this is really the other side of the coin.
So Cynthia, could you tell us a bit about where we are today?
We're at Long Point Eco Adventures. These are great partners. They've collaborated with us on many of our projects, one being Moccasin Identifier. Another one is when we bring our students out on the land from our high schools and elementary schools in the Grand Erie District School Board. They've hosted us without a penny to be spent. They've been a great support. They've also allowed us to put our healing circle here for the MI project, as well as the mural that you see up on the main building. They've allowed us to run our turtle hatchery here, which has been a great success. It brings people closer to the reasons why we're doing this work.
Is there anything that we can do to help further preserve this area, help with the projects that you're talking about, kind of thing?
I mean, everybody can do their part.
Mm-hmm.
Spend some time on the land.
Yeah.
Connect to the land. When you connect to the land, you realize you're here for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
You're part of it.
Yeah.
Fall in love with what you're part of. This can't happen without people and extra hands on deck. Mind your garbage, mind your consumption,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Stop buying stuff just because you can. And spend your time in the forest.
Yeah. You have spoken a bit about this documentary. Where can we find some info about that?
Well, you can keep an eye on our Facebook.
Okay.
And it'll soon be going on a platform called Kinema.
Okay.
And it can be, you can rent it there. You can do a showing of it through that platform with your not-for-profit, and you can raise funds. So what we do is we split 50-50, 5% goes to the platform from each side. So you end up with 45% of the proceeds.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Cynthia, and thank
You're
you for your passion and all that you've been working on, and I can't wait to see your documentary.
Thanks for having me.
So now I'm joined by Dany from the Canadian Wildlife Services. So thanks, Dany, for joining us. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your role at the Canadian Wildlife Service?
Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm with Canadian Wildlife Service, the branch of Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'm a wildlife technician. My role is very diverse here. I'm involved with most projects that happen on the ground, and they can include biological monitoring, habitat improvement, infrastructure maintenance, invasive species control. We have impounded habitat cells right here where management is required for that. And I also deal with facilities and contract management.
We're talking about Long Point, and I actually didn't realize that there's a national wildlife area on the peninsula of Long Point. And that's where we are today, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what is a national wildlife area?
Environment and Climate Change Canada establishes national wildlife areas for the purpose of conservation, research, and interpretation. National wildlife areas can be marine or terrestrial habitats. And it is established under the authority of the Canada Wildlife Act, and it's a place first and foremost for wildlife. So we have 57 national wildlife areas across Canada that protect 3.5 million hectares of habitat.
Wow.
We have 10 national wildlife areas in Ontario, and here at Long Point we have 2, Big Creek and Long Point National Wildlife Areas, and combined they make up for 4,050 hectares of land. So.
What made this area kind of so special that it deserved not just 1 but 2 national wildlife areas?
Long Point is unique in the sense that it's the longest freshwater sandspit in the world. It is also, the wildlife areas also fall within the Carolinian Life Zone, which is the highest diversity of species and habitat in Canada. This combined with the amount of coastal wetland habitat that we have here makes Long Point one of the most important natural areas in the Great Lakes. Here at Big Creek and Long Point, we have over 50 species at risk, documented 400 species of birds, 175 of those nesting. We have approximately 700 species of vascular plants. And during peak migration, we can have 100,000 waterfowl and 20,000 tundra swans, so the place can be quite teeming with wildlife.
And you were actually telling me about a certain coyote project.
It has to do with the management of white-tailed deer.
Okay.
And so in the 1980s, there were 550 white-tailed deer at Long Point. At that time, the carrying capacity was 40. And what I mean by carrying capacity is that the amount of vegetation available in the winter to support the herd. So obviously there was a big problem there. Deer were not doing well. There was starvation and all that. Anyway, the overabundant deer population obviously overbrowsed the National Wildlife Area to open park-like conditions. So Canadian Wildlife Services initiated deer calls and brought the population of the herd down to a sustainable level. Big piece of the missing puzzle for deer management was an understanding of what impact or influence coyote as a top predator had at Long Point on the wildlife area. So,
Right.
so we are collaborating a 3-year project with University of Western, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. The research will includes a camera trap project, a live trapping, a GPS deployment project, so we're putting GPS collars on coyotes. That information and research will help inform future deer management decisions.
So that was kind of more of a terrestrial example. What kind of projects are you doing here? Very aquatic meets terrestrial here.
So part of our restoration program here at Big Creek, we do invasive control, and one of the species that is a threat to biodiversity is common reed, or Phragmites australis. It is a threat to biodiversity, and Canadian Wildlife Service has been combating this species for 4 years now in the wildlife area. And within both national wildlife areas, we've treated over 690 hectares of habitat.
Wow.
Another restoration technique we employ here at Big Creek National Wildlife Area are wetland excavation projects. We do those to increase interspersion within the wetlands to improve wetland function and promote biodiversity. What I mean by interspersion is that is the mix between open water habitat and vegetation communities. So ideally, or theoretically, the best scenario that you manage for and you can establish is maximum interspersion, which would be a 50% ratio of open water to vegetation habitat. And this maximizes wetland health and wildlife biodiversity potential. One of the threats we have at Big Creek here is excessive sediment loading that washes downstream during runoff events and storms. So sediment infilling of wetlands can alter water levels, impede wildlife movement. It can disturb flow and connectivity, and can encourage growth of undesired vegetation. Often that vegetation is invasive species. So Canadian Wildlife Service has taken steps through wetland excavation projects to mitigate these issues. And an example of that, up at the Han unit of the Big Creek National Wildlife Area, we excavated and created a sediment retention pond to help capture those sediments. We've also dug channels and ponds to increase interspersion so that we can maintain connectivity from the upper marshes in the Big Creek Wetland Complex all the way here to the head of the inner bay. Wow. So overall it improves water quality, flow, promotes biodiversity, and keeps the wetlands healthy.
You and everyone who's worked on this project has made a very beautiful spot that someone can come and appreciate. Are these areas accessible to the public? Is there trails here?
One of the main attractions at Big Creek for public access is this walking trail. We're on one of its viewing towers. So along the walking trail, it's 2.2 kilometers long that traverses through the interior of the marsh here. So access to the Long Point National Wildlife Area is a little different than Big Creek. Access to most of the National Wildlife Area is prohibited year-round to protect sensitive habitat and species. However, there are 2 designated beach areas that the public can access between May 15th and September 15th for walking, wildlife viewing, and swimming each year.
Thank you so much, Dany, for joining us and
You're
sharing all you know about Long Point and everything it has inside.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. We learned so much about Long Point, and special thanks to my guests, Paul, Cynthia, and Dany, for showing us so much that Long Point has to offer. Until next time, see you in nature.